Chapter 16, Part 2. Looking at me, the hunter said, "Son, I think almost every man in this camp is hoping you win it, but it's not going to be easy. You're going up against four of the finest hounds there are." Turning to my father, he said, "Did you know the two big Walker hounds have won 4 gold cups?" Very seriously, Papa said, "You know, I have two mules down on my place. One is almost as big as a barn. The other one isn't much bigger than a jackrabbit. But that little mule can outpull the big one every time." Smiling, the hunter turned to leave. He said, "You could be right." Papa asked me again where I thought we should start hunting. I had been thinking about this all day. I said, "You remember when we jumped that last coon in the swamp?" Papa said, "Yes." "Well, the way I figure it, more than one coon lives in that swamp," I said. "It's a good place for them as there are lots of crawfish and minnows in these potholes. If a hound jumps in one day, he's got a good chance to tree him." Papa asked, "Why?" "It's a long way back to the river and about the same distance to the mountains," I said. "Either way he runs, a dog can get pretty close to him, so he would have to take to a tree." That evening we climbed into Grandpa's buggy and headed for the swamp. It was dark by the time we reached it. Grandpa handed Papa his gun, saying, "You're getting to be a pretty good shot with this thing." "I hope I get to shoot it a lot tonight," Papa said. Under my breath, I said, "I do too." After untying the ropes from my dogs, I held onto their collars for a minute. Pulling them up close, I knelt down and whispered, "This is the last night. I know you'll do your best." They seemed to understand and tugged at their collars. When I turned them loose, they started for the timber. Just as they reached the dark shadows, they stopped, turned around, and stared straight at me for an instant. The judge saw their strange actions. Laying a hand on my shoulder, he asked, "What did they say, son?" I said, "Nothing that anyone could understand, but I can feel that they know that this hunt is important. They know it just as well as you or I." It was little Ann who found the trail. Before the echo of her sharp cry had died away, old Dan's deep voice floated out of the swamp. "Well, let's go," Papa said eagerly. "No, let's wait a minute," I said. "Wait, why?" Grandpa asked. "To see which way he's going to run," I said. The coon broke out of the swamp and headed for the river. Listening to my dogs, I could tell they were close to him. I said to Papa, "I don't think he'll ever make it to the river. They're right on his heels now." By the time we had circled the swamp, they were mauling treed. The judge said, "Boy, that was fast." I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. Looking at me, he smiled and nodded his head. Papa and I knew I had judged the coon perfectly. He didn't have time to reach the river or the mountains. My dogs had treed the coon in a tall ash which stood about 50 yards from the river. I knew the 50 yards had saved us a good hour because he could have pulled a trick after trick if he had gotten in the water. We spied the coon in the topmost branches. At the crack of the gun, he ran far out in the limb and jumped. He landed in an old fallen tree top. He scooted through it. Coming out the other side, he ran for the river. The tangled mass of limbs slowed my dogs, and they all but tore the treetop apart getting out of it. The coon was just one step ahead of them as they reached the river. We heard them hit the water. Running over, we stood and watched the fight. The coon was at home in the river. He crawled up on old Dan's head, trying to force him under. Before he could do it, little Ann reached up and pulled him off. In a scared voice, Papa said, "That water looks deep to me." "Maybe you'd better call them off," said the judge. "That's a big coon, and he could drown one of them easily in that deep water." "Call them off," I said. "Why, you couldn't whip them off with a stick. There's no use of anyone to get scared. They know exactly what they're doing. I've seen this more times than one." Grandpa was scared and excited. He was jumping up and down, whooping and hollering. Papa raised the gun to aim. I jumped and grabbed his arm. "Don't do that," I yelled. "You're sure to hit one of my dogs." Round and round in the deep water, the fight went on. The coon climbed on old Dan's head and sank its teeth in one of his long, tender ears. Old Dan bawled with pain. Little Ann swam in and caught one of the coon's hind legs in her mouth. She tried hard to pull him off. All three disappeared under the water. I held my breath. The water churned and boiled. All three came to the top about the same time. The coon was between the bank we were standing on and my dogs. He swam toward us. They caught him again just as he reached the shore. He fought his way free and ran for a large sycamore. Old Dan caught him just as he started off. I knew that was the end of the fight. After it was all over and the coon had been skinned, Grandpa said, "I hope we don't have to go through that again tonight. For a while I thought your dogs were goners." The judge said, "Well, have you ever seen that? Look over there." Old Dan was standing perfectly still with his eyes closed and head hanging down. Little Ann was looking at his cut. and bleeding ears. She always does that, I said. If you'll watch, when she gets done with him, he'll do the same for her. We stood and watched until they had finished doctoring each other. Then, trotting side by side, they disappeared into the darkness. We followed along, stopping now and then to listen.